I can still recall the cloying warmth in the community center the day I first set eyes on Laurelwood Estates. It was a bright Saturday morning, one of those days that teased the promise of spring. The windows were open, letting in that gentle breeze carrying the scent of newly mowed grass. A few children giggled on the street while birds chattered in the oak trees just outside. Standing there, among stiff board members and suspicious neighbors, I remember thinking, this place is perfect. I pictured my future self, relaxed, maybe sipping coffee on a front porch, chatting with neighbors who, in my daydream, were kind and understanding, neighbors who cared about one another. In that moment, I truly believed I had found my new home. But life isn't kind enough to give us dreams on a silver platter without a fight. Back then, my name, Sabrina, didn't carry the weight it would soon gain. I was just me, a middle school teacher in her late 20s, moving from an apartment downtown into what I hoped would be my forever home. I had worked 3 jobs to save up enough for the down payment, teaching full-time, tutoring on weekends, plus a part-time job at a bookstore. I prided myself on never complaining about the hustle. Nobody owed me anything, I reminded myself. I had to earn my place, my space, my future. The first few weeks in Laurelwood Estates unfolded with a quiet sort of charm. I introduced myself to the neighbors, put up new curtains, painted the dining room a lighter shade of gray, and always waved to the older couple across the street. Every now and then I'd see the property manager, Denise, walk by with her crisp pantsuit and massive ring of keys. She'd do random inspections of lawn lengths, check the flower beds, and politely wave. At first it seemed like a caring community, but soon I got the first hint that something sinister brewed beneath the surface. One morning, about 2 months after I moved in, I found a letter taped to my front door. It had the official HOA logo in the corner, 2 evergreen trees with Laurelwood in swirling script. Inside, the notice told me my lawn was an inch too tall, and if I did not rectify it within 72 hours, I would be fined. An inch? I muttered, staring at the letter. My eyes flicked over to my neighbors who had equally imperfect lawns, but they seemed unbothered. No notices taped to their doors. Perhaps the management was just cracking down on the newest resident. So I mowed that day, fuming silently. I tried to laugh it off. It was such a small transgression, hardly worth a real complaint. Just part of living in an HOA, I told myself. In time, I would learn to shrug it off. But the small annoyances began to pile up like dusty old bills in the back of a drawer. First it was the lawn. Then they said my hedges were improperly trimmed, or that my trash bins were not brought in from the curb quickly enough on Tuesday morning. There was a scolding letter about leaving the trash can in sight by my garage. There were pointed remarks at the monthly HOA meetings about how certain residents, me, needed to learn the rules properly. I grew uneasy. It was an uncanny, draining feeling, akin to constantly stepping on eggshells. I still believed, naively I see now, that if I paid attention to the rules, if I worked harder, they'd leave me alone. I just needed to be the perfect resident and everything would settle down. It was the driveway incident that shattered that illusion. It happened on a late summer evening when, after a particularly exhausting school day, I arrived home to find my single-car garage door jammed. My car had started making strange noises the week before, so I suspected I'd have to bring it in. Stress weighed on me. I was feeling ill and had a headache creeping behind my eyes. Attempting to fix the garage door by myself seemed impossible. I called a repair service, but no one was available until the next day. So I pulled my car, my beloved old sedan, onto the driveway and left it there overnight. I'd never even considered that to be an issue. It was my driveway after all. Why would I question it? The next morning, when I stepped outside to greet the repairman, I saw the notice duct taped to my windshield. The duct tape alone was enough to spike my anger, because it left sticky residue all across the glass. But the words on the notice: "You have been fined $150 for improper parking, HOA rule violation." My jaw literally dropped. I scanned the lines. Evidently, the HOA banned overnight parking in driveways to maintain a consistent neighborhood aesthetic. All vehicles were required to be parked inside garages or in designated guest spots down at the community parking lot. I felt my blood boil. I looked around, eyes darting from house to house, searching to see if anyone else was being slapped with the same violation. But no, everyone else had empty driveways or were double parked in large multi-car garages. After cursing under my breath, I realized that, in my fresh wave of anger, tears had stung my eyes. Anger, frustration, humiliation. It was all swirling in me, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I told myself, this is it. This is the last straw. I stormed into my house, ignoring the poor repairman who had just arrived with his tools, and called Denise, the property manager. She answered with faux sweetness. "Good morning, Laurelwood Estates. This is Denise. How can I help you?" "Denise, it's Sabrina in house number 24. I just received a ridiculous fine for parking in my driveway," I said, voice quivering with adrenaline. The garage door was broken. I had no other option. I tried to keep my tone respectful, but indignation crackled through every word. "You know the rules. We recently changed them to maintain neighborhood uniformity. A letter was sent out 2 months ago." Denise replied in that unwavering, smooth tone that I loathed more with every passing second. "I didn't realize one night. I'm sorry you had to learn this way." She cut me off. "But once fines are levied, there's no reversing them." Her words were like ice water. So that was it. I hung up. I felt that she was silently gloating, a delicate little quiver of satisfaction in her voice that only reinforced how little she thought of me. I just stood there, my heart pounding. That day, the repairman had the garage door fixed within minutes. It was an easy job. But the $150 fine lingered, taunting me. My coworkers, my friends, and my family shook their heads in disbelief. "It's your driveway," they'd say. "They can't do that, can they?" But they could. They were the HOA after all. The day after paying that fine, I resolved to speak out. At the next HOA board meeting, I marched in with a carefully prepared speech. I planned to show how arbitrary the rule was and how it unfairly burdened residents. I brought pictures of other neighborhoods that allowed driveway parking without turning the streets into visual chaos. I tried to remain calm, logical, persuasive. But if there is one thing I learned in my short time as a homeowner under an oppressive HOA, it's that logic has no place in power games. They wanted control, and I was an easy target. The 5 board members sat up front, Denise in her usual crisp pantsuit, arms crossed, eyes glimmering with disinterest as I pleaded my case. Even after I laid out facts, all I received in return was a dull, condescending nod. When I finished, the board president spoke. "Thank you, Sabrina, for bringing these concerns. We'll take them under advisement." Then they moved on to the next agenda item. That was it. I was seething. Take under advisement? They clearly had no intention of changing anything. I stormed out, the echo of their bored sighs following me. In that moment, something hardened in me. An ember of defiance lit deep in my chest. The old me had always tried to compromise, to reason, to be nice. But that kindness had brought me nothing but frustration. So in the privacy of my car that evening, I whispered to myself, "Enough is enough. I will find a way to show them they can't push me around." I began digging. I read every single bylaw and public record I could get my hands on. I discovered that the community parking lot was actually owned by a private holding company from years ago, and the HOA leased it at a steep rate. But nowhere in the records could I find details on whether the property had been fully transferred to the HOA. Strange. Meanwhile, Denise and the board continued their petty harassment, mailing reminders of new rules, suspiciously zeroing in on my house for unwarranted inspections, even going so far as to complain about a few dandelions in my grass. But I kept calm. I had a plan. Something about that parking lot and the property lines surrounding it was rattling around in my mind. If the HOA didn't own the parking lot but merely leased it, who did? Finally, after weeks of scouring county records, I uncovered a name: Cordell Ventures, LLC. It was an old corporate entity used for land holding. I dug further and discovered it was a small-time real estate firm run by the Cordell family. For decades, they had sold off farmland and subdivisions, piece by piece. The Laurelwood Estates HOA had a lease agreement with Cordell Ventures for the parking lot, and that lease was about to expire in a few months. My heart pounded as I realized the significance. The parking lot, that oh-so-precious area where they demanded we keep our cars instead of our own driveways, wasn't under their control, and the lease was up for renewal soon. I wonder if it's for sale. I wasted no time. In that same breath, I called the phone number I found in a dusty online directory. I explained I was a homeowner in Laurelwood Estates inquiring about the property. The woman on the other end laughed. "The parking lot? I'm actually the last Cordell in charge of that. I want to get rid of it. The HOA's always been a nightmare to deal with." She invited me to her office. I drove there the next morning, shaking from excitement and nerves. The office was tiny, barely more than a cramped space with old file cabinets and coffee-stained carpets. Nora was about 70, sporting large glasses and a no-nonsense personality. As soon as I introduced myself, she flashed a wry grin. "I've been looking for a buyer for months. The HOA doesn't want to pay a fair price. They keep trying to lowball me, but I'm done with them." She confided, eyes rolling. "If you're serious, I can give you a decent deal. But I need you to understand, it's about the principle for me too. I'm tired of HOAs pushing around the little guys." We sat down and hammered out details. She suggested a surprisingly affordable price for a piece of commercial property, probably because the lot was far from prime real estate outside the subdivision. But it was central to the neighborhood, so the HOA needed it. It was worthless to nearly anyone else. Still, it was a substantial chunk of change. I hesitated for half a second. Could I do it? Could I throw all my savings into buying a parking lot? But the memory of that $150 fine burned in my mind. The looks of petty smugness, the humiliations, the countless times I'd tried to reason with them, the entire board ignoring my voice. My stomach turned into knots. I pressed my lips together and stared at the contract. Sometimes you have to make a bold move. I nodded to Nora. "I'll do it." We arranged the financing through a small bank that specialized in local real estate. My father, a retired contractor who had always instilled in me the importance of taking bold chances, gladly co-signed for me. "Anything to help my little girl, especially if it means getting back at those bullies," he teased. There were days I thought I might lose my nerve, that I was being rash. But each time I remembered the humiliation, the petty fines, the sleepless nights fretting over every blade of grass, and my anger fueled me to carry on. I kept the purchase under wraps for as long as I could. The deal closed 6 weeks later on a Monday morning. The final walkthrough was anticlimactic, a silent, empty stretch of asphalt lined with white parking stripes. I drove there, parked my car, hilariously enough in the only free place to park overnight in Laurelwood, climbed out, and stared. The parking lot was not glamorous, but it was mine. An unexpected swirl of pride blossomed in my chest. This was the biggest risk I'd ever taken, and I prayed it would pay off. The next HOA meeting was that Thursday evening. I attended with my new best friend, my newly minted property deed tucked neatly in a folder. Despite my pounding heart, I walked in with my head held high, scanning the crowd of fellow residents in the small gathering room. Most of them were bored, flipping through the agenda, waiting for the usual humdrum. Budgets, landscaping fees, guest pass protocols. Up front sat Denise and her 4 board members, each wearing that usual expression that seemed half smugness, half boredom. The meeting commenced. They called out announcements, stricter fines on trash can placement, new rules about allowable front door paint colors, and, inevitably, a resolution to renew the lease on the parking lot. Just as they were about to vote, I raised my hand, my pulse galloping. "I'd like to speak on that agenda item." Denise adjusted her reading glasses in annoyance. "Yes, Sabrina?" The condescension dripped from her lips like poison. I slid the folder onto the table near the front. "Just a moment ago, you mentioned renewing the lease with Cordell Ventures for the parking lot." I paused, letting the silence draw out, letting the tension in the room intensify. Then, in a calm voice I had practiced many times over in my bedroom mirror, I continued, "There's been a change of ownership. Cordell Ventures no longer owns the lot." Denise frowned. Did they sell to someone else? A flicker of worry raced across her features. My voice caught in my throat from excitement and nerves, but I forced it out. "Yes, they sold it to me." Her expression was deliciously stunned. "You?" The word sounded strangled. The entire board looked at each other, baffled, as if they had not understood. A murmur rippled among the residents. I think I spotted a few subtle fist pumps. Not everyone had been thrilled with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. I nodded, pulling out the deed with deliberate grace. "Yes, I now own the entire parking lot, effective earlier this week." One of the older board members nearly sputtered. "Why on earth would you—" I felt my posture straighten with an energy I'd never before possessed. A personal investment. Now, if the HOA wishes to continue using my property as its designated parking area, there will be some changes to the terms. And with that, I took a pointed glance at Denise, remembering every humiliating letter, every sneering remark. "I believe it's time for us to renegotiate with fairness in mind." There was an uproar. Some of the residents burst out cheering. Others exclaimed how that was a bold move. Denise demanded we hold a private session. The board called a recess, retreating to the front corner of the room where they whispered angrily amongst themselves. I watched them, heart pounding with both fear and triumph. This was a high-stakes game. Could it backfire on me somehow? Possibly. But at that moment, as I saw the flicker of desperation in Denise's usually imperious eyes, I knew I had the upper hand. When the board reconvened, Denise cleared her throat. "We find ourselves in a unique position. Obviously, we need to discuss how to proceed with the parking regulations." She lowered her voice, a forced humility surfacing. "Sabrina, if you would like to propose updated lease terms, we'll consider them." Her face was stiff with resentment, but it gave me life. For once, they were the ones forced to follow my lead. I took a deep breath, remembering all those sleepless nights, all those petty fines. "This is your moment, Sabrina. Use it well." "My terms are simple," I said, voice steady. "First, I want a formal apology for the harassment and the arbitrary fines." There was a ripple of shock in the room. Denise's jaw clenched. "Second, I insist the overnight parking ban in driveways be lifted. Residents should have the right to park on their own property without penalty." Murmurs of agreement sounded from the crowd. I heard someone say, "Hallelujah, that rule was ridiculous." My heart soared to hear the support, but I kept my voice measured. "Finally, from now on, HOA fines will require an evidentiary hearing with an impartial committee. No more one-sided notice taped to your car or your door. If a resident is accused of a violation, they deserve the right to present their case fairly." Denise looked as though she had swallowed glass. The other board members exchanged glances, some appearing somewhat relieved, others furious. I stood firm. I was done being the quiet, submissive homeowner. If they wanted that parking lot, and oh, trust me, they needed it, because the CCRs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, mandated them to provide additional parking for guests, then they would meet my terms or face the consequences. Finally, the board president let out a slow exhale. "We will need time to deliberate on these conditions." I refused to let them off easy. "I'm sure you will, and I'll give you that time, as long as no new fines are levied against any resident unless it's a severe safety hazard. If I see even a single notice posted in the next 30 days without a hearing, the HOA will lose its parking privileges. I'll have every car towed off my lot." I finished, hearing my voice ring through the room. For a moment, the air crackled with tension. Then, unexpectedly, the crowd erupted in applause. Weeks of pent-up frustration from neighbors who had also been hounded by petty, arbitrary rules spilled over. Some even rushed forward, patting me on the back, shaking my hand. I felt tears threatening my eyes. Tears of relief, of validation, of having finally found some measure of justice. The meeting ended in chaos, with the board scrambling to gather themselves while neighbors swarmed me with thanks and awe. I'd never felt so empowered. Over the next few weeks, negotiations took place. The board tried to push back, but they had no legal ground. Their lease expired, and I owned the lot. The threat of losing that lot would cripple them in terms of compliance with county codes. Finally, they had no choice but to accept my terms. Overnight driveway parking ban? Rescinded. The property manager's power to levy fines at will? Removed. Now, an elected committee of volunteer homeowners would review allegations of violations, ensuring fairness. And the best part, an official public apology. It was typed on HOA letterhead and distributed to every resident. I still have a framed copy of it in my study. Denise, forced to sign her name under the word apologies, must have choked on her pride. But my story doesn't end there. See, winning that power struggle didn't erase the hurt I'd felt over those many months. I realized the deeper issue was that I'd allowed myself to be silenced for so long, to place others' comfort above my own sense of justice. In the aftermath, some members of the community asked me to join the board. They wanted new leadership. At first, I laughed it off. I'm not a bureaucrat, I told them. But the more I considered it, the more it felt like an opportunity to protect others from the tyranny I had endured. So I ran in the next election and won the seat as board president. I had no illusions about the time commitment. Between my teaching job and new responsibilities, my schedule was insane. But I found fulfillment in rewriting outdated rules, making the community a place where people's voices mattered. Neighbors who once hid behind closed doors came forward to voice concerns about security, safety, and the constant intimidation from previous boards. I learned so many heartbreaking stories. Single mothers threatened with huge fines for late lawn mowing because they worked 2 jobs. Elderly couples worried about being forced out due to rules about yard cleanliness they couldn't physically keep up with. One man confided he had spent nearly $3,000 on fines over the past decade, too scared to fight back. My changes weren't perfect. The new system faced resistance from the old guard who had grown comfortable with having power. But we persisted. Within a year, the neighborhood took on a new atmosphere, friendlier, more supportive. The petty letters and humiliations vanished. Nobody was penalized for a car in their driveway. I even started a volunteer group to help older residents with their yard work. We had weekend events to plant flowers, paint shutters, and fix fences. Together, as neighbors, not as enemies. As for me, something else changed in my life. Sometime in the middle of this intense transformation, I started seeing a fellow teacher from across town, a man named Joel, who volunteered with me on a few community cleanup days. He'd watch me with quiet admiration as I led the charge in raking leaves for Mr. Gordon down the road, or coached Mrs. Sandoval on how to request a hearing if she was wrongly accused of a violation. Joel was soft-spoken, gentle, and supportive in ways I'd never experienced. When I told him about how I bought an entire parking lot to stand up for myself, he grinned and said, "That's the bravest thing I've heard in a long time." For the first time, I felt truly seen, appreciated for my strength instead of diminished or ridiculed. It's a small detail in the larger story, but that blossoming relationship gave me hope for a personal future that was kinder, free from the fear of being controlled or undermined. Meanwhile, the old property manager, Denise, stepped down. Publicly, she cited personal reasons, but I suspect it was the humiliation she felt every time she passed me in the neighborhood and saw that I was the new face of leadership. I heard she took a job in a different state. Part of me found satisfaction in that, but a stronger part of me wished she'd stayed to see how a community could thrive under fair rules. Maybe she'd have learned something about compassion. Over time, ownership of the parking lot was no longer about revenge. I decided to gift it, via a minimal payment, to the HOA, in a final symbolic gesture of unity, but only after our new board finalized updated bylaws that protected residents from future exploitation. I didn't want to keep that lot forever, lording it over them. I only wanted the power for as long as I needed it to fix the community. Once the new rules were in place, I was satisfied. At a celebratory dinner where we signed the final papers, I remember tapping the copy of the new bylaws. "Keep this up," I told the board members, "so no one has to fight the same fight I did." And they promised me they would. Looking back, I can't help but marvel at how much that $150 fine changed my life. What began as a ridiculous attempt to bully me into submission sparked a fire in me that I never knew existed. Owning that parking lot. It wasn't just about humiliating them, though yes, I admit, I took more than a little pleasure in seeing their shocked faces. It was about reclaiming my sense of agency. I learned that you can't always play nice with those who wield unfair power, that sometimes you have to stand up in a way that shakes the foundations of what they believe they control. You have to risk everything to gain everything. Now, when I look out from my porch, my heart no longer clenches with fear of pettiness. Instead, I breathe in the freedom of a neighborhood where people watch out for each other. The petty is gone, replaced by genuine connections. Yes, we still have rules. Some we need to keep things tidy and safe. But it's a far cry from the dictatorship it once was. And every time I see someone casually park in their own driveway, wave to a passing neighbor, and head inside without fear of finding a violation notice, I smile. And I remember how one act of stubborn defiance, buying that parking lot, allowed me to transform not just my life, but the lives of others as well. Perhaps that's the greatest twist of all. The HOA tried to break me, to subdue me with silly fines, but instead, they awakened a new sense of who I am, someone who stands for fairness, who protects the overlooked, who's willing to roll up her sleeves and do what it takes. It wasn't the outcome they wanted, but it was the one they created by underestimating me. And let me tell you, even now, years later, whenever I catch a glimpse of that framed letter of apology on my wall, my lips tug into the smallest grin. I think of how much I've grown, of how that quiet, worn-down teacher walked into Laurelwood Estates dreaming of a peaceful suburban life, only to find herself tested to her core. The battles changed me, but in the end, I found my voice. I found my power. I found genuine friends, a neighborhood that feels like home, and even love. And all it cost me was $150 and a whole lot of courage. It's a bargain I'd make all over again.